When we remember a time, we remember moments. A kaleidoscope of the sights, the sounds, the emotions that remind us of the way we were. Our world. It's about time. Here are Linda Ellerby and Ray Gandolf.
For the next hour, think of your television set as a time machine.
Tonight, we're going back a generation to a time we now tend to look at through rose-colored glasses with cracked lenses.
Welcome to our world. It's autumn 1957. And to quote the song, there's a whole lot of shaking going on. Yes, that grandfatherly gentleman, Dwight Eisenhower, is still president. But just when we thought we knew all the answers, someone seems to have changed the questions.
If social phenomena had sounds, the sound of school desegregation in the fall of '57 was the sound of dragging feet 3 years after the Supreme Court had held that segregated schools were intrinsically unequal. Little Rock, Arkansas had a modest plan to begin integrating schools gradually from high school down. By that September of '57, school officials and most of the townsfolk thought they were ready to accept blacks in a white school. They were wrong.
Central High, Monday, September 2nd, the last day before school was supposed to start. In this case, think of it as the quiet before the storm. This time, the noise inside would be drowned out by the noise outside. Central High was about to be integrated, and if only 9 of the more than 500 eligible black students chose to switch to Central High, there was reason. Nobody expected trouble until Governor Faubus, running for re-election against 2 segregationists, found trouble to be useful politically. So with little reason to do so, Faubus ordered the National Guard and state troopers to surround Central High. Monday night, he went on television.
They will not act as segregationists or integrationists, but as soldiers called to active duty to carry out their assigned task.
Ernest Green was one of those 9 students and one of the many people to wonder just what Faubus was saying.
As he talked about all the impending violence that was going to occur, and he was doing this for the safety and the well-being of everybody in Little Rock, I thought to myself, he ain't talking about me. And I don't think he has my well-being in mind.
Elizabeth Huckabee, the school's vice principal for girls, was equally stunned.
I was just overwhelmed with that idea, the idea of soldiers of any sort around a school. It sounded like a foreign country to me.
Some, like Melba Patillo, another of the Little Rock 9, misunderstood the governor.
Even when we heard the announcement, who thought that he was putting the troops up there to keep us out? We thought, oh, what a nice man. Maybe he's putting them up there to help us in or whatever. But the point is, there was no realization that this man was declaring war, which in fact he was.
To this day, Orville Faubus disagrees.
Well, I didn't use the Guard for the purpose of protecting the students and putting them in the school because it was still contrary to state law, contrary to state constitution, and contrary to 85% of the sentiment that had been checked by a poll in the state. And second to that, it was a federal court order, and it was the federal government's responsibility to enforce its own court order, which I wanted them to do, and it had no difficulty from me.
But on Tuesday morning, September 3rd, the only troops or weapons in sight belonged to 320 Arkansas Guardsmen and state troopers who had come, as one said, to make sure Central High stayed off limits to Negroes. On that day, heeding the advice of the school board, the Little Rock 9 stayed home. Wednesday, September 4th. The Guard remained and was joined by a large crowd, there to see what happened when 9 young black American citizens, backed by the Supreme Court and a federal order, actually attempted to exercise those civil rights they actually had, despite a politician who happened to be governor.
The morning of the 4th, I got ready. I put my clothes on, and all the time I was doing this, I had just this awful feeling in my stomach, in the pit of my stomach, like apprehension, fear.
Terrence Roberts went to the school, and he went alone.
I can recall the wide-open mouths and the glazed eyes and the attempts to spit at me over the shoulders of the reporters. And I could see them as I looked over, and I could hear, and I can still remember the kind of statements a lot of obscenities, a lot of use of the word nigger, this kind of thing.
I drove up to the front of Central High School with my mother in a car, and I got out of the car, and the first thing that made my heart skip a beat was that it sounded like being at a football game. You know that kind of rumble of noise that you hear when you enter a huge stadium or something where there's a big crowd? Finally, I stood on tiptoes to look over people's heads, to look across the street, and saw, you know, some others of the Little Rock Nine. And then that's when some people looked around and said, hey, we got us a nigger right here.
Belva's mother, Lois Patillo.
Somebody started chasing us, and I couldn't run as fast as Melba could, so I told her to run on and make it to the car.
Screaming at each other like, and I'll never before heard that blood-curdling sound in her voice, which was, go to the car, get out of here, go now. And we did, and we got out of there.
By refusing to allow black students to enter this school, Governor Faubus was putting states' rights ahead of federal law, and thereby challenging the president in a way he could not ignore. Slowly and reluctantly, Eisenhower was being drawn into a controversy that might force him not only to uphold federal law, but the very principle of integration itself. At that point, both sides began to scramble to find an acceptable solution.
On September 14th, with the black students still being denied admittance, Faubus met with President Eisenhower in Newport, Rhode Island. Faubus said he would obey the law of the land, and Ike said he believed him. But the National Guard stayed on duty for 6 more days until a federal court ordered Faubus to remove them. He did, and left the state on a business trip. He also left the problem of law enforcement in the fragile hands of the Little Rock Police Department. Monday, September 23rd, the 9 blacks tried again. Gail Weeks was a detective.
I was concerned about our ability to hold the line, so to speak. We did not have adequate personnel. We had absolutely no training in riot control. We were not equipped. We were assigned different locations around the school. We were already thin, and we, as a result of this, it even weakened us further because it spread us out in such a way that we couldn't adequately handle it.
When we went into the school, we went by private car. It just so happened at that same time there were 3 or 4 black newspaper reporters who were crossing the front of the school, and the mob out in front attacked them.
The students took advantage of the diversion to enter through a side door.
Someone had noted the blacks' entrance and had called out to the mob out on the street that the blacks were in.
The mob outside Central High now numbered about 1,000 sullen, angry people. Faubus, with no evidence to back him up, had claimed that integration would cause violence. Now the crowd was making that self-serving prophecy come true. Washington was keeping a close eye on things, and Harry Ashmore, the editor of the Arkansas Gazette, talked with the Deputy Attorney General on the phone.
There were mobs in the streets at that time. There were people roaming around the city. We were getting reports of outbreaks of violence. And I said, I think the situation is that the local authorities simply cannot handle it. It's practically clear that Faubus is not going to give them any assistance. So I think my own view is that some federal intervention is going to have to follow if you're going to prevent this from deteriorating into a real mob violence, which hasn't happened yet, but the tension is here.
I do remember the real fervor with which the crowd was moving toward the school, and the shouts and the taunts and all that.